here with a discussion video for you. If you're watching this and you're in the US, like many of my viewers are, just know that this may be not as interesting to some of you. This is going to be primarily about, the situation with firearms and firearm ownership in Canada, in light of the fact that we've recently elected a Liberal government who has in their platform a plan or a point that they want to further restrict firearm use and ownership in Canada. And I thankfully it's a minority government, and I'm hoping that they won't be able to achieve some of the things they have listed in their campaign promises. But this is one that I really have to ask why. What are they doing? What are they trying to achieve? And if you're thinking that the why listed on the title page here was, me explaining why, it really isn't. It legitimately is a question. This makes no sense to me. So what are you trying to do? Okay, they claim, they list that, hey, we're trying to give safer communities. We're trying to make safer communities, and that sounds a little disingenuous. And the reason is because you're not doing anything that would possibly potentially achieve that. Okay. And certainly further restricting the use of firearms to legal firearm owners doesn't make any sense because they're not the problem. And furthermore, we don't actually have a problem with firearms in Canada. We just don't. Okay, so those are the two. So let me reiterate. When they say we want safer communities, okay, there are two problems I have with that. One, the steps that they're taking are not in any way related to making anyone safer. Okay, it would be like, I don't know, me saying, I want my kids to eat healthier, so I'm going to blow up a bunch of balloons in the backyard. Like, the two things are completely unrelated. Okay. Number two, all right, they're responding to a problem that really isn't a problem. Okay, we do not have a problem with gun violence in Canada. Yes, have been some shootings in Toronto, but number one, those shootings have not been at a greater volume than in previous years. In fact, violent crime statistically has been dropping and continues to drop. Okay, and that's true both in Canada and in the US, and really in many places in the world. Okay, so again, I ask, why? Okay, why are we passing laws to solve a problem that doesn't exist? All right, and so let me elaborate just a little on this. Okay, first of all, the shootings that do take place, the violent activity with guns that does take place, is due to gangs and drugs. Right? That's a problem that you could actually look at. By the way, just before I forget, I'm on thehuntinggearguide.com, and this is a list of top 10 restricted firearms in Canada. So all the guns that you see on this page are restricted in Canada, which means they're legal to own, but they're not legal to hunt with or have outside. You can own this and you can use it only at a shooting range. Okay, so that's all of the guns that are here. And I'm just going to kind of scroll through these pictures and leave a couple different ones on screen as we work our way through. Okay, so the shootings that do take place in Canada are a result of gangs and guns. They're not a result of people owning guns. In fact, I would argue that none of the shootings that take place anywhere can be directly tied to, oh, if lots of people own guns. That argument just doesn't hold any water. Okay, it's not a fact that there's any correlation between the number of guns and the amount of crime that takes place with guns. It's just not correlated. Sorry. So the other problem that we need to address here is that guns just don't kill a lot of people in Canada. Okay, it's not a major problem to be worried about. In fact, guns kill less than practically every other dangerous thing that you could think of, and many things that you don't usually think of as dangerous. All right, if you compare the deaths caused by firearms compared to like death caused by driving, death caused by drinking or drug use, none of them even come close. In fact, people are more likely to drown in Canada than they are to be shot, to be killed by a firearm. You're almost as likely to be hit by lightning as you are to be shot in Canada. All right, it's a little less, but not much. All right, so the first thing we need to do is get the statistics straight. Okay, there is no problem with firearms in Canada. That is not a thing. Okay, the next thing that I want to say about this is that is that we're now creating political policy to deal with a non-problem. Okay, so we don't have a problem with firearm crime in Canada, and now what we need to do is fix this non-problem. And what we're going to do to fix it is further restrict the use and ownership of firearms for legal gun owners. All right, and this is again where you ask the question, why? Okay, and this one is especially insane. Now, let me stop here for 1 second and let me suggest something that I think has a lot to do with what's going on here. Okay, if you're watching this and you just don't like guns, all right, if you just have this visceral reaction to guns where they make you uncomfortable and make you break out in a cold sweat, and you think at any second, if there's a gun in the room, it's mysteriously going to go off and kill everyone. Okay, I get it. There are people, right? My mother is deathly afraid of snakes. Okay, it doesn't matter how many documentaries she watches or books she reads indicating that snakes are not that dangerous. If she's within 100 feet of a snake, she thinks she's about to die. All right. And so if that's your reaction to guns, that's fine. And I know some people feel that way. In fact, I remember walking through a store, and as we walked past the gun aisle, the person I was with started to be uncomfortable and act really weird and like make sidelong glances over at the guns. And I stopped and said, what's going on? Like, are you going to be okay? And they said, look at all the guns. What's going on? And I was like, yeah, we were in either Cabela's or Bass Pro. I can't remember which one, but this person like lost their ability to function properly. Okay, and look, if you're like that when it comes to firearms, oh, I get it. All right, but just know that it's an irrational fear, and people have irrational fears. They have irrational reactions to things where they just don't like them. I react that way to vegan hamburgers. Okay, they're horrible, and the whole thought of them seems against everything that's right and good. Okay, but I'm not making any plans or beginning a political effort to ban vegan hamburgers, even though I do believe the world would be a much better place without them. All right, and so let me just speak to you for 1 second. If you're that kind of, this visceral, like emotional reaction to a firearm, if seeing this picture on a screen is making you start to cry, okay, that's not my intent. But what I would say is do some research, get someone who you know and love and respect who knows about firearms to share some of their knowledge and experience with you. Go to a range. Familiarity will help a lot with that. All right. But here's what I think is going on here, and that is I think that politicians know that there are some people who have that visceral fear reaction and can't help themselves. They're just irrational, and as soon as they see a gun, they begin to have break out in cold sweats. All right. What they know is that they can play off that fear to gain votes. Right? They say, look, we'll protect you from the evil guns. And people say, yes, please, those guns are awful. They're killing everyone. Okay, and so what's being done here has nothing to do with protecting anyone and has everything to do with the fact that guns just make some people uncomfortable, and there are those who are willing to exploit that irrational fear for their own political gain. All right. Furthermore, what they're claiming to do is as irrational as the fear of firearms that they're playing off of. Okay, I want you to imagine this scenario. I have two boys, Joel and Asher, and let's just imagine for a second that I gave them both Nerf swords, which I did. And then one of them, now this part didn't happen. This is the part that's purely fictional. So then one of them, let's say Asher, just I don't know why, because he's younger. Okay, let's say Asher is running around hitting people with the Nerf sword when it's, inappropriate times. He's knocking my hot coffee out of my hand. He's smacking guys between the legs. He's just a complete disaster with this Nerf sword, and the Nerf sword needs to be dealt with. Okay, so I go to my son Joel, who has been using his Nerf sword like to dress up as ninjas and just do the typical things that kids do with pretend swords. And I say, Joel, I'm taking your Nerf sword. And he says, why? And I say, well, because Asher keeps hitting everyone with the Nerf sword. Asher is a complete disaster. These Nerf swords are obviously bad. I'm taking this away. And Joel says, but why are you just taking my Nerf sword? What about Asher's Nerf sword? And I say, well, Asher doesn't listen to the law, so I can't get a hold of his sword. So I'm going to take yours just so that mom thinks I'm doing something about Nerf swords. Right? It would be completely irrational to punish the person who's not doing anything because someone else still is causing a problem. And it would be even worse when my solution doesn't actually address the problem that exists. And that's exactly what is happening with the firearms regulation, or the effort to have further firearms regulations in Canada. All right. Now, if we did have some sense, there would actually be changes the other way when it comes to firearms. All right, the first thing to point out is handguns, which are one of the things that is in the current discussion. Let's ban handguns completely. All right, handguns are already highly regulated. They're a restricted firearm, which means you can own it, but at your house it has to be kept locked in a safe, and the ammo has to be locked away separate from it. You can use it, but in order to do that, you have to transport it to a shooting range, okay? And there you can practice target shooting with your handgun. And when you're done, you lock it up and take it home and put it back in the safe. All right, that's it. Now, we do have something called, well, currently the law is that if you have a restricted license, that also serves as your authorization to transport. So that is your permission to move that gun around to anywhere that it's legally allowed to go. So that means the range or a gunsmith, and that's it. All right. That's the first thing. Second thing, an assault rifle is not made by looks. Okay, so I think when most people think of an assault rifle, they picture this right here. All right, this is not an assault rifle. This is a firearm that is designed to be ergonomic and out of modern materials. Okay, so the only difference between this and your grandfather's hunting rifle is that this one is made out of aluminum and plastic, and your grandpa's hunting rifle was made, well, and metal, by the way, but your grandpa's hunting rifle was wood and metal, and that's it. And so just because this doesn't have any wood on it, that does not make it an assault rifle. This functions exactly the same as your grandfather's hunting rifle. You pull the trigger and a bullet comes out and it fires, okay? That initiates the action. That's it. Right? If you want to fire 2 bullets or 3 bullets or 5 bullets, you have to pull the trigger every single time. Right? That's how this works. It is a semi-automatic, not fully automatic firearm, and therefore not an assault rifle. It's not designed for killing people. It's not a gun that you put this in the hands of someone and they can just kill 100 people the way you hear people talk about. This fires just like any typical gun. The features that you see here, the scope and the barrel shroud and the adjustable stock, those things are designed to make the gun more comfortable and more accurate for you to shoot well. Okay, and that's all those updates do. It's, this tablet we're looking at right here is designed in the same way that this gun is designed. That is, you build it in such a way that it can be effectively used for its intended purpose. All right, the same is true of this. Changes are made to where things align so that the action, so the recoil is easier to manage. All it is taking, right, modern understandings of mechanics and physics and applying them to firearms. So just like, some of these guns, this is a Bushmaster ACR. So some of these guns look really scary because they're black. Okay, well, guess what? The color of a gun has nothing to do with how it functions, and certainly has nothing to do with how it should be classed legally. All right, let's move on to a couple of other points. The next one is, in Canada, owning a firearm for self-defense is not a legitimate reason to apply for a possession and acquisition license. That needs to be changed. Of course, a firearm is an extremely useful self-defense tool, and there are people in this country that live far from help and need the ability to protect themselves and others. And listen, I can tell you as a first responder and as a citizen that first responders respond to bad people doing bad things or bad things happening. They don't prevent them. Okay, they can't. And so someone breaks into your house, the police can't magically warp into your living room and arrest them. They've got to get there, and by the time they do, it's going to be too late. Right? There's no possible way that they can protect you from bad people who want to do bad things. We have to protect ourselves. And I can tell you from personal experience, one time I witnessed a woman who was high on drugs assaulting a man, and he was just trying to fend her off, but you could tell he was in real trouble. So I called 911. I told the operator what was happening and that I needed the police at a particular location. Well, about 15 minutes later, a police officer finally showed up. By the time that had happened, this woman had already ripped this guy's shirt off, scratched him, blackened his eye, broken the mirror off of his car, and left. Okay. She had time to do whatever she wanted to do and still get away before the cops could even think about showing up. Okay. And so that's not how it works. You need to be prepared to defend yourself. You're the only one who can. And the only legitimate way for large portions of the population, people who are elderly. Okay. This guy, luckily it was a guy versus a girl. All right. Because if a guy was hitting a girl the way this girl was hitting the guy, there would very likely be serious damage, perhaps even death. All right. And so for, when the situation is reversed, the only way a woman in that situation can defend herself is with a firearm. That's the fact of the matter. And the same goes for people who are elderly, people who are disabled in some way, people who are injured. If you've got a broken arm or a broken leg and you're assaulted physically, you have no chance, right? Unless you have a firearm, you cannot defend yourself. And since self-defense is a human right, the ability to own a firearm ought to be a human right as well. License and training makes good sense. Our training system is fairly good, but a little rudimentary. We could certainly improve the way that we train and license firearm owners. I've taken the courses. They're good, but they definitely emphasize the safety side of storing your firearms and cleaning your firearms more than the safety side of using them. So I think there could be some added emphasis in our system based on here's some extra steps that you might want to consider when you're actually either hunting with a firearm or at the range with a firearm. And many ranges have their own courses, but I feel like why should a range have to have its own course, right? You should be qualified to use the firearm that you're licensed to use. If you're not, that means then the training involved with getting that license is deficient. All right. We should encourage and allow good citizens to own and carry firearms. This is a proven deterrent to crime. In the US where this happens, okay, estimates run as high as 2 million times a year that a firearm is used to rescue someone rather than assault them or harm them. Okay, yes, 30,000 people are killed every year in the US by firearms. That's a big number, but it's not nearly as big as the number of people who are saved by firearms, which is 2 million. Okay. And finally, all the rifles should be dropped from the restricted list. So this page here, this is a list of some of the good. Now, these are recommendations. So this is for someone who has a restricted firearms license, and they're saying, here's some of the firearms you may consider buying since you have this license. The first one is, of course, an AR-10 or 15 or other variants. All right. By the way, AR stands for Armalite Rifle. It does not stand for assault rifle. It stands for Armalite Rifle. And the 15 and 10 are different variations of that. Here's a Chris carbine. Here is an FNPS 90, which is a cool little gun. There's a company in Fisherville, Ontario, who actually modifies these to make them non-restricted by lengthening the barrel and making a couple of other changes. Bushmaster ACR. This is an interesting one. This is, of course, an older design. You know, I think it goes all the way back to like World War II or something. But again, modified to be legal in Canada. And there are more and more. And the problem is, the RCMP is responsible for categorizing these firearms, not the government. And you know, if we're going to make laws, somebody who's been elected needs to make laws. So just drop the rifles from the restricted class. They're not the problem anyway. And in fact, in Canada, handguns aren't the problem either. So there's my rant, guys. I know it's a little long-winded, but I wanted to cover all of those points. I feel like they're important and worthwhile. If you're a firearms owner, I'd love to hear your comments down below. More importantly, if you're not a firearms owner, all right, I'd really like to hear your comments down below. And I mean, disagree with me if you want to. We can have a great discussion down in the comments. Please, if you're watching this and you're a Second Amendment guy, be polite. Remember, the purpose of a video like this and about this whole discussion is to persuade people and to change their minds about how they look at firearms, not to just put them off and tell them they're idiots. That's not going to help anyone. So thanks for watching, guys. Sorry about the divergence from my usual content, but I just felt like this was something that I really wanted to talk about and something that's been on my mind. And so there you go. Thanks a lot. I know this isn't knives. Will, I'm sure in the next day or so, be back to your regularly scheduled content. I've got lots of cool knives and knife videos coming up. Thanks for watching. We'll talk to you soon.